So we've talked about the opioid crisis and how the CDC lied and faked data showing that addiction and overdoses were caused by prescription opioids when it was really black market opioids that were causing the problem. We also showed how the crackdown on prescription opioids resulted in overdoses increasing, first with black market heroin and later with fentanyl, which is hundreds of times stronger than heroin. We've also talked briefly about carfentanil, an especially strong version of fentanyl that is thousands of times as potent as heroin. I mean, it makes sense when you realize it's made as an anesthetic for elephants. So, learning no lessons at all, they've been trying to make a dent in fentanyl overdoses by giving addicts naloxone, which can counter the effects of opioids. Unless, like carfentanil, it's so strong it completely overpowers it. Pharmaceutical researcher Josh Bloom, who wrote the article linked in the show notes, along with Dr. Jeff Singer, came up with the Iron Law of Prohibition. As enforcement of drug prohibition increases, the potency of prohibited substances tends to increase. Amid all the crackdowns in China and on the Mexican border, we're seeing, as I predicted years ago, more homespun fentanyl, which is faster and cheaper to produce than heroin because you don't need a grow operation. You just create it in a lab. But the more makeshift labs they have here in the States produces fentanyl of a much poorer quality. But before you start celebrating, remember the Iron Law of Prohibition. They're making up for the less potent domestic fentanyl by adding carfentanil. Previously, it's been cut with xylazine, a veterinary sedative that isn't neutralized by naloxone. On the other hand, it isn't as deadly as fentanyl. But in the period from July to December of 2023 and January to June 2024, the number of overdose deaths with carfentanil detected increased 720%, practically overnight. Of course, we know the solution: end the war on drugs. But as Bloom said in a comment, quote, "Still too much potential extortion money for trial lawyers and the paid toadies who tell them what they want to hear. This has never been about public health, only money." The issue has to do with binding strength, which is basically how sticky a molecule is to a receptor. The higher the number, the more persistent it is. Morphine has a binding strength of just 1. Fentanyl has a binding strength of 100, but so does naloxone, so it's an effective antagonist. He doesn't give a figure for heroin because heroin is actually metabolized before it reaches the brain, turning into morphine. But carfentanil has a binding strength of 10,000, 2 orders of magnitude greater than naloxone. And if that's not bad enough, the half-life of carfentanil in the human body is about 6 hours, but it's just 1 hour for naloxone. So not only do you need far more naloxone to treat a carfentanil overdose, you need to keep giving it to the patient. That's tricky in a hospital setting, but doable. The problem is, most of the reduction in overdoses comes from civilian applications of naloxone. A layperson can use naloxone to stop an overdose of fentanyl in himself or others, but the problems of using it to treat a carfentanil overdose are now obvious. Bloom wrote in the comments, "Whether the half-life is 1 hour or 6 won't matter when naloxone is administered at a party or, even worse, on the street. The fact that multiple IV doses or an infusion of naloxone may save lives in an ICU is largely irrelevant. If carfentanil becomes widely used, people will be dropping dead left and right." And as Bloom points out in the article, the real lesson here should be about what else will emerge in the future. Quote, "It is impossible to predict when and where the next worst drug will emerge. The addition of carfentanil to fentanyl, should it become widespread, will become an instant, deadly problem. It's a truly evil drug, and it's unlikely that we are prepared to deal with it. The Iron Law continues to reign." He also mentioned that while opioid overdoses did decline, overdoses in meth and cocaine continue to increase. So overall, yeah, you're not solving the problem of overdoses. But go on, sue Walgreens a little harder. I'm sure that'll turn things around.